It was 1999 when Zeev Herzog, professor of archaeology at Tel Aviv University, who at one time was the director of their Institute of Archaeology, wrote a piece for the weekly Haaretz magazine titled Deconstructing the Walls of Jericho. His words were difficult ones for biblical literalists. Following 70 years of intensive excavations in the land of Israel, archaeologists have found out the Israelites did not sojourn in Egypt, did not wander in the wilderness, did not conquer the land of Canaan in a military campaign, and did not pass it on to the 12 tribes of Israel. Additionally, as opposed to the long-held claim of a sovereign united kingdom of Israel, the united monarchy of David and Solomon, which was described in the Bible as a regional superpower, was, at most, a small tribal kingdom. Herzog describes the ascent of William Foxwell Albright in the 1920s, and later, following the establishment of the State of Israel, the founding fathers of Israeli archaeology, including Benjamin Mazar, Naaman Avigad, Yigal Yadin, and others. Herzog writes that using the Bible as a literal guide to exploring the Bronze and Iron Ages was standard practice from the beginning, which would continue for decades. However, writes Herzog, little by little cracks began to appear in the picture. To take one example, the story of Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, wandering for 40 years across the Sinai. Many Egyptian documents known to us do not mention at all the sojourn of the Israelites in Egypt or the later exodus of an entire people, which was curious considering the Egyptians kept highly detailed records which included even small incursions. Many documents mention the practice of wandering shepherds to enter Egyptian territory in times of drought or famine and to settle at the fringes of the Nile Delta. Or how about Mount Sinai, where Moses was to receive the 10 Commandments? Generations of researchers have tried to locate the site of Mount Sinai and the encampments of the Israelite tribes in the wilderness. Despite the strenuous efforts, not even one site has been located that would accord with the biblical account. And of course, the historicity of the conquest, or rather genocide of the Canaanites, was especially problematic. Here, the most severe difficulties have arisen. The book of Joshua reveals that as the armed men approach Jericho, the city's walls miraculously collapse, ushering in the slaughter. But Kathleen Kenyon, the excavator of Jericho, established definitively that there is no support for the conjecture that Jericho was fortified with a city wall during the late Bronze Age. In reality, excavations at all the sites uncovered only unfortified settlements, while in many instances, the site held only isolated structures of the ruler's palace and no actual city. Urban culture in late Bronze Age Palestine was disintegrating in a process that lasted hundreds of years and was not the result of a military conquest. Herzog isn't revealing that big of a secret, he writes. These facts have been known for years, but Israel is a stubborn people and nobody wants to hear about it. These issues and more were addressed by a colleague of Herzog at Tel Aviv University, Emeritus Professor of History Shlomo Sand. In the 13th century BCE, the purported time of the Exodus, Canaan was ruled by the still powerful pharaohs. This means that Moses led the freed slaves out of Egypt to Egypt? Sand also took issue with the numbers. According to the biblical narrative, the people he led through the wilderness for 40 years included 600,000 warriors. They would have been traveling with their wives and children, implying a party of around 3 million in total. Aside from the fact that it was utterly impossible for a population of such size to wander through the desert for so long, an event of such magnitude should have left some epigraphic or archaeological traces. The ancient Egyptians kept meticulous records of every event, and there is a great deal of documentation about the kingdom's political and military life. There are even documents about incursions of nomadic groups into the realm. Yet there is not a single mention of any children of Israel who lived in Egypt or rebelled against it or emigrated from it at any time. There's also another, more uncomfortable fact. History can be ironic. Few people have noticed, or are willing to acknowledge, that the land of Israel of biblical texts did not include Jerusalem, Hebron, Bethlehem, or their surrounding areas, but rather only Samaria and a number of adjacent areas. In other words, the land of the northern kingdom of Israel. Because a united kingdom encompassing both ancient Judea and Israel never existed, a unifying Hebrew name for such a territory never emerged. As a result, all biblical texts employed the same pharaonic name for the region, the land of Canaan. Israel, without Jerusalem. Indeed, the second book of Chronicles reveals, with Israel once more intact, he returned to Jerusalem. Though claims to the city have been the source of so much strife and suffering, Jerusalem's significance historically, especially among the Zionist movement of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, is tentative. As explained in a helpful article for the New York Review of Books by Avishai Margalit, Professor Emeritus of Philosophy at Hebrew University, Margalit points out that the founding of Jerusalem predates Islam, Christianity, and in fact, Judaism itself. It is thought that Jerusalem was founded about 4,000 years ago as a city of ritual worship by the Canaanites. Jumping ahead thousands of years, Zionism had ambitions to create a new Jewish society, but Jerusalem was the least appropriate place for the founding of such a new society. Most of the Jerusalem Jews were part of an ultra-Orthodox community of the sort that the Zionists were rebelling against. A community that lived on donations and did not have the kind of productive life that the Zionist revolution aspired to. It is no wonder, then, that the Zionists preferred to build the new Hebrew city in the golden sands of Tel Aviv. Most of the immigrants to Israel, about 80%, settled along the Mediterranean coast, a region that had never been the historic homeland of the Jewish people. It appears this ambivalence is a historic trend. Unlike Christianity, Judaism does not regard the pilgrimage to Jerusalem as an act of penance for transgressions, or an act that can purify the believer, and we therefore find no recommendation that it be implemented. The data appear to illustrate this point further. We know of approximately 30 texts that provide accounts of Jewish pilgrimage during the 1700 years between 135 CE and the mid-19th century. By contrast, for the 1500 years between 333 CE and 1878, we have some 3,500 reports of Christian pilgrimages to the Holy Land. These words are at stark odds with the Israeli Proclamation of Independence issued at Tel Aviv on May 14, 1948. The land of Israel was the birthplace of the Jewish people. After being forcibly exiled from their land, the people remained faithful to it throughout their dispersion and never ceased to pray and hope for their return. Exiled from their land is, of course, a reference to the story of the Roman Empire exiling Jews from their province of Judea. This foundational myth is the source of the theory that the Jewish diaspora the world over can trace their ancestry to Palestine. Therein lies their claim to the land, and the reason why Jewish immigrants, wherever they may be, are said to be returning to their homeland when moving to Israel. Authoritative experts on Jewish history take issue with this theory, to put it plainly, not least of which being Israel Yuval, professor of Jewish history at Hebrew University. From his The Myth of the Jewish Exile from the Land of Israel, the Romans, like any victorious army, customarily took prisoners, but they did not have a policy of exiling conquered nations from their lands. According to Josephus's probably inflated figures, 1.1 million were killed in Jerusalem, and about 97,000 were captured. Many of these met their deaths in battles with animals and in circus entertainments. Others died of hunger. But otherwise, the Jews were left in place. They emigrated from the land of Israel during the first centuries of the first millennium in a slow and gradual process, and not as the result of an intentional policy on the part of the Roman and Byzantine authorities. The myth remained and was given credence when, in the 4th century, Orosius, reviewing the data found in Josephus regarding 90,000 Jews taken captive in Jerusalem, concluded that these prisoners, who, according to him, were scattered all over the world, were the founders of the Jewish diaspora in general. Tel Aviv University's Shlomo Sand further takes issue with Josephus's estimate of 97,000 captured. There was no such metropolis in the little kingdom of Judea. A cautious estimate suggests that Jerusalem at the time could have had a population of 60,000 to 70,000 inhabitants. But most problematic of all, nowhere in the abundant Roman documentation is there any mention of a deportation from Judea, nor have any traces been found of large refugee populations around the borders of Judea after the uprising, as there would have been if a mass flight had taken place. Hebrew University's Avishai Margalit's views of the supposed exile are also worthy of attention. The claim that a Palestinian Arab descended from the early Jews is no less probable than that of, say, Menachem Begin or Golda Meir. In the popular and ahistoric version of Jewish history, the destruction of the Second Temple is linked with the exile from the land, but a considerable part, perhaps even a majority, of the Jewish people already lived in the diaspora before the temple was destroyed. And after it was destroyed, the size of this diaspora did not increase very greatly. Most of the Jews who survived the Romans' destruction of the country remained in Palestine. It is not particularly far-fetched to conjecture that they were the ancestors of those inhabitants who accepted Islam many generations later. A conclusion echoed by Noor Masalha, formerly the director of the Center for Religion and History at St. Mary's University, now with the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. It would not be unreasonable to argue that the modern Palestinians are more likely to be the descendants of the ancient Israelites and Canaanites than Ashkenazi Jews, many of whom were European converts to Judaism. Certainly historically, in contrast to the myth of exile and return, many of the original Jewish inhabitants of ancient Palestine had remained in the country but had accepted Christianity and Islam many generations later. A view at one point held by Israel's earliest leaders, including David Ben-Gurion himself, if it can be believed. Writing in collaboration with Yitzhak Ben-Zvi, Israel's longest-serving president, the pair published a book-length study titled The Land of Israel in the Past and in the Present. Speaking of the Palestinian farmers, or fellahin, the fellahin are not descendants of the Arab conquerors, who captured the land of Israel and Syria in the 7th century CE. The Arab victors did not destroy the agricultural population they found in the country. They expelled only the alien Byzantine rulers and did not touch the local population, nor did the Arabs go in for settlement. Even in their former habitations, the Arabians did not engage in farming. They did not seek new lands on which to settle their peasantry, which hardly existed. Their whole interest in the new countries was political, religious, and material, to rule, to propagate Islam, and to collect taxes. Further, despite the repression and suffering, the rural population remained unchanged. Indeed, the erasure of history regarding the myriad kingdoms, namely Himyarite, Khazaria, and Adiabene, whose rulers converted to Judaism, was essential to the Zionist project from the very beginning,